In the heart of London, where cobblestone streets met towering modern buildings, there stood a small but bustling courthouse. It was an unassuming place, often overlooked by tourists who preferred the grandeur of nearby landmarks like Buckingham Palace or the Houses of Parliament. Yet on this particular morning, the courthouse became the center of attention, not because of the case being heard, but because of one very unusual visitor. Captain Thomas Whitaker strode into the courtroom with an air of quiet authority that demanded notice. He wasn't just any man. He was a member of the Queen's Royal Guard, a position steeped in history and tradition. His uniform spoke volumes even before he said a word. The bright red tunic, adorned with intricate gold braiding, gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. His polished black boots clicked sharply against the tiled floor as he walked, each step echoing through the otherwise silent room. But it wasn't his tunic or boots that drew gasps from those present. It was the massive bearskin hat perched atop his head. The hat loomed over him like a dark cloud, its brim wide enough to cast a shadow across his face. It wasn't just tall. It was imposing, almost regal, making everyone else in the room feel slightly smaller by comparison. To some, it might have seemed absurd, a relic from another time, but for Captain Whitaker, it was more than just a piece of headgear. It was a symbol, a badge of honor passed down through generations of soldiers who had sworn their lives to protect the nation. As he made his way to the witness stand, whispers rippled through the gallery. Spectators leaned toward one another, exchanging hushed comments about the unexpected sight before them. Some marveled at the sheer spectacle of it all. "Is this really necessary?" one woman murmured to her companion, gesturing discreetly at the towering hat. Others were more curious than critical, wondering why such formality had been brought into what was supposed to be a routine legal proceeding. The case itself revolved around an incident near Buckingham Palace involving alleged damage to public property. Captain Whitaker had been called as a witness because he was stationed nearby when the event occurred. While his testimony promised to shed light on the matter, it was clear that his appearance alone had already stolen the spotlight. Judge Eleanor Hartley sat at her bench surveying the scene with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. Known throughout the legal community for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude, she prided herself on maintaining order and decorum in her courtroom. She adjusted her glasses, peering down at the figure now seated on the witness stand. Her lips pursed ever so slightly as she took in the full scope of Captain Whitaker's attire, the gleaming buttons, the perfectly pressed tunic, and of course the unmistakable bearskin hat. "Captain Whitaker," she began, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation like a knife. The room fell silent instantly. Everyone turned to look at her, sensing that something interesting was about to unfold. "While we appreciate your service to our nation, and indeed your presence here today, I must ask, is it entirely appropriate to wear that into my courtroom?" Her tone carried a mix of authority and incredulity, drawing stifled laughter from the gallery. A few people covered their mouths to hide amused smiles while others exchanged knowing glances. Judge Hartley's question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Was this display of tradition and pageantry fitting for a setting dedicated to the pursuit of justice? Captain Whitaker rose to his feet, standing ramrod straight as protocol dictated. Despite the weight of the judge's words and perhaps the literal weight of the bearskin hat, he remained composed. His expression betrayed neither offense nor amusement, only calm resolve. He looked directly at Judge Hartley, meeting her gaze with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "This is not merely a hat. It is a symbol of duty, tradition, and sacrifice. A uniform worn by generations who have pledged their lives to protect this country." There was a pause after he spoke, during which the room seemed to hold its collective breath. His words resonated deeply, carrying with them a sense of history and purpose that few could ignore. But Judge Hartley wasn't easily swayed. She adjusted her glasses again, leaning forward slightly as if to emphasize her point. "Symbol or not, Captain, this is a court of law, not a parade ground. Perhaps you could have left the bearskin outside." Her remark elicited more chuckles from the audience, though they quickly faded as Captain Whitaker prepared to respond. The tension in the room grew palpable. Would he defend his choice of attire, or would he concede to the judge's critique? Whatever happened next, it was clear that this exchange would be anything but ordinary. For now, however, the focus remained firmly on the man in the bearskin hat. Every eye in the courtroom was trained on him, waiting to see how he would navigate this unexpected challenge. Little did anyone know, his response would soon transform the atmosphere entirely, turning what began as a simple rebuke into a moment of profound reflection. For the judge, the spectators, and perhaps even Captain Whitaker himself. Judge Eleanor Hartley's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Captain Thomas Whitaker to justify his decision to wear the towering bearskin hat into her courtroom. The murmurs from the gallery had died down, replaced by an almost electric silence as everyone waited for his response. It was clear that this wasn't just about the hat anymore. It was a clash of perspectives, a meeting of two worlds, tradition versus practicality, symbolism versus simplicity. Captain Whitaker stood, tall, his posture unwavering despite the weight of the judge's pointed question. His face remained calm, but there was a flicker of determination in his eyes. He took a deep breath before speaking, ensuring that every word carried the gravity he intended. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and measured, "I understand your concern and I respect the sanctity of this courtroom. However, what you see atop my head is far more than an accessory or an item of clothing." He paused, letting his words settle over the room. The judge leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression unreadable but clearly intrigued. The audience, too, seemed captivated, their earlier amusement giving way to genuine curiosity. Sensing their attention, Captain Whitaker continued, "This bearskin hat is not something I chose lightly to wear today. It has been part of the Royal Guard's uniform for centuries, dating back to battles fought long before any of us were born. Each strand of fur represents sacrifice, courage, and loyalty, not only to the crown but to the people we serve." His tone softened ever so slightly as he spoke, adding a layer of sincerity that resonated deeply with those listening. "When I put on this uniform, including the bearskin, I am reminded of all those who came before me, men and women who stood guard through rain and snow, day and night, without complaint. They protected our institutions, our freedoms, and our way of life. By wearing this hat, I honor their memory and carry forward their legacy." The room grew quieter still, as if no one wanted to miss a single syllable. Even Judge Hartley, whose stern demeanor rarely wavered, appeared momentarily thoughtful. Her fingers drummed lightly against the edge of her desk, a subtle sign that she was processing his explanation rather than dismissing it outright. But Captain Whitaker wasn't finished yet. He knew that simply explaining the history behind the hat wouldn't be enough to sway someone like Judge Hartley, who valued logic and pragmatism above sentimentality. So he shifted gears, addressing her specific concerns directly. "I understand that this may seem out of place here, Your Honor. A courtroom is a solemn setting where justice is served, and I fully respect that. But isn't it true that justice itself is built upon principles of integrity, discipline, and steadfastness? These are the same values embodied by this uniform, and yes, even by this hat." There was a murmur of agreement from the gallery, though it was quickly stifled when the judge shot a glance in their direction. Undeterred, Captain Whitaker pressed on. To remove the bearskin would feel like abandoning those principles even symbolically. And while I recognize that this court operates under different rules than the parade ground, I believe there is value in remembering the ideals that unite us all. At this point, Judge Hartley raised an eyebrow, her curiosity now mixed with skepticism. "Captain Whitaker," she said, her tone sharp but not unkind, "you make a compelling argument. But surely there must come a time when tradition gives way to practicality. Courts exist to uphold laws, not to showcase symbols. Surely you can see how bringing such pageantry into this setting might detract from the seriousness of the proceedings." Her choice of words, pageantry, drew a few chuckles from the crowd, but Captain Whitaker didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded respectfully, acknowledging her point. "You're absolutely right, Your Honor," he replied. Tradition alone cannot dictate behavior, especially in a place as important as this. But allow me to ask, is it possible for tradition and modernity to coexist? Can we find meaning in symbols without letting them overshadow the purpose they represent? The judge tilted her head slightly, considering his question. For a moment, the courtroom felt less like a legal arena and more like a philosophical debate. Captain Whitaker seized the opportunity to drive his point home. Think about it, Your Honor. Every institution in this country, from Parliament to the judiciary, is rooted in history. We adapt and evolve, yes, but we also preserve elements that remind us of where we came from. This hat is no different. It reminds me, and hopefully others, of the sacrifices made to protect the very system of justice you oversee. His words struck a chord, not just with the judge but with everyone present. People in the gallery exchanged glances, some nodding slowly as they absorbed his message. Even Judge Hartley seemed momentarily taken aback by the depth of his response. She adjusted her glasses again, perhaps to buy herself a moment to think. "What you're saying," she ventured cautiously, "is that this isn't just about personal pride or showmanship. You genuinely believe that wearing this hat serves a greater purpose." "Exactly, Your Honor," Captain Whitaker affirmed, his voice filled with conviction. "It's about honoring the past while serving the present. And if my presence here today with this hat can remind even one person of the values we share, then I consider it worth it." The tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding. Judge Hartley studied him for a long moment, her expression softening ever so slightly. Then, with a small sigh, she leaned back in her chair. "Very well, Captain," she said finally. "You've given us much to think about. While I still maintain that this courtroom isn't the ideal place for such elaborate attire, I won't insist that you remove the hat for now." A ripple of approval ran through the gallery, though it was quickly silenced when the judge raised a hand. "However," she added firmly, "let this serve as a reminder that respect for tradition must always be balanced with respect for context. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly, Your Honor," Captain Whitaker replied, bowing his head slightly in acknowledgement. There was a quiet dignity in his gesture, a subtle nod to the compromise they had reached. As he resumed his seat on the witness stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted noticeably. What had started as a tense exchange between a judge and a soldier had evolved into something deeper, a conversation about heritage, duty, and the delicate balance between old and new. The spectators, initially amused by the spectacle, now found themselves reflecting on the broader implications of what they had witnessed. For Judge Hartley, the encounter was a rare moment of introspection. Known for her strict adherence to protocol, she couldn't help but admire Captain Whitaker's ability to articulate the significance of his role with such clarity and passion. As she glanced around the room, she noticed that many others shared her sentiment. The man in the bearskin hat had done more than defend his choice of attire. He had sparked a dialogue that transcended the confines of the courtroom. And though the trial itself would soon resume, with testimonies and evidence taking center stage, once again the image of Captain Whitaker standing firm in his convictions lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. In that brief exchange, he had managed to bridge the gap between past and present, reminding everyone present of the enduring power of tradition and the importance of respecting it even in unexpected places. As the courtroom settled back into a semblance of order, there was an undeniable shift in the air. The initial tension between Judge Eleanor Hartley and Captain Thomas Whitaker had softened, replaced by a palpable sense of mutual respect. It wasn't just that the judge had conceded to allow the bearskin hat to remain. It was the way Captain Whitaker's words had resonated with everyone present. His response hadn't been defensive or dismissive. Instead, it had invited reflection, sparking curiosity about the deeper meaning behind symbols like his uniform. But Captain Whitaker wasn't done yet. Sensing that he had captured the room's attention, he seized the moment to expand on his earlier points. "Your Honor," he began again, his voice calm but imbued with quiet authority, "I appreciate your willingness to hear me out. Allow me to share something personal, if I may." The request caught Judge Hartley off guard. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it signaled a shift in tone. Up until now, their exchange had been formal and structured, rooted in logic and tradition. But this felt different. This was personal. Intrigued, she nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. "When I first joined the Royal Guard," Captain Whitaker said, his gaze steady but reflective, "I'll admit I didn't fully understand what wearing this uniform meant. To me it was a job, a noble one, yes, but still just a job. I thought the bearskin hat was, well, cumbersome, to be honest. Heavy, impractical, and frankly uncomfortable." A ripple of soft laughter spread through the gallery, breaking the tension further. Even Judge Hartley allowed herself a small smile at the admission. "But over time," he continued, his voice growing warmer as he spoke, "I came to see it differently. Every morning when I put on this uniform, the tunic, the boots, and yes, the hat, I felt connected to something larger than myself. It wasn't just about standing guard outside Buckingham Palace or marching in parades. It was about carrying forward a legacy of service and sacrifice, and that realization changed everything for me." He paused, letting his words sink in. The courtroom was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on him. Gone was the earlier amusement. In its place was rapt attention. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear more. Even Judge Hartley seemed transfixed, her usual stoic demeanor replaced by genuine interest. "To wear this hat is to carry a responsibility," Captain Whitaker went on. "It's not just about looking impressive, it's about living up to what it represents. Discipline, loyalty, respect. Those aren't just words to us, Your Honor. They're values we live by every single day. When people see this uniform, they don't just see a soldier. They see a promise to protect, to serve, and to uphold the principles this nation holds dear." His voice grew firmer as he emphasized his point. "And isn't that what justice is all about? Upholding principles, protecting the innocent, serving the greater good? In many ways, Your Honor, our missions aren't so different. You preside over this court to ensure fairness and accountability. We stand guard to protect the freedoms and institutions that make justice possible. We're two sides of the same coin, working toward the same goal." For a moment, no one moved. The weight of his words hung in the air, connecting the dots between the ancient traditions of the Royal Guard and the modern mechanisms of the legal system. Judge Hartley's expression softened further, her earlier skepticism melting away. She glanced around the room, noticing how captivated the audience had become. Some spectators were nodding in agreement, while others sat perfectly still, absorbing every word. Encouraged by the reaction, Captain Whitaker pressed on. "Your Honor, I understand that this courtroom demands a certain level of decorum. I wouldn't dream of undermining that. But perhaps there's also value in recognizing that symbols matter. They remind us of who we are and what we stand for. Whether it's the robes you wear, the gavel you hold, or even the flag hanging in the corner of this room, these things aren't just ceremonial. They're reminders of the ideals we strive to uphold." Judge Hartley's eyes flicked briefly to the British flag draped neatly against the wall, then back to Captain Whitaker. There was a flicker of understanding in her gaze, as if she were seeing the situation in a new light. Symbols, after all, weren't foreign to her world either. From the black robes judges wore to the intricate carvings adorning the courthouse walls, the legal profession was steeped in its own forms of tradition. Why should the Royal Guard symbols be any less meaningful? And let's not forget, Captain Whitaker added with a slight smile, that sometimes symbols can inspire. Think about it. When children visit Buckingham Palace and see the guards in their full regalia, it leaves an impression. It teaches them about history, duty, and pride in their country. In the same way, when people walk into a courtroom and see the rituals and symbols of justice, it reinforces their faith in the system. Isn't that worth preserving? The room erupted into murmurs of approval, though they quickly subsided when Judge Hartley raised a hand for silence. Her expression had transformed entirely. Gone was the stern, no-nonsense judge from moments ago. In her place was someone thoughtful, almost contemplative. She removed her glasses, setting them gently on the desk before addressing Captain Whitaker directly. "Captain Whitaker," she said, her tone markedly softer, "you've given us much to consider. I must admit I approached this matter purely from a practical standpoint, but you've reminded me and all of us that context matters. Symbols do have power, and dismissing them outright would be short-sighted." She paused, glancing around the room as if to gauge the collective mood. "That being said," she added with a wry smile, "I trust you won't make a habit of bringing such grandeur into my courtroom too often. After all, we wouldn't want to overshadow the law itself, would we?" Her remark drew polite laughter from the gallery, easing the remaining tension in the room. Captain Whitaker smiled faintly, bowing his head in acknowledgement. "Understood, Your Honor. I assure you this is a rare exception." As he took his seat once more, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a clash of perspectives had evolved into a shared moment of insight. The audience, initially entertained by the novelty of the situation, now found themselves reflecting on the broader themes of tradition, duty, and unity. Even Judge Hartley seemed affected, her rigid adherence to protocol tempered by a newfound appreciation for the stories behind the symbols. For Captain Whitaker, the exchange had served its purpose. He hadn't set out to win an argument or prove a point. Rather, he had sought to bridge the gap between two worlds, showing that tradition and modernity could coexist harmoniously. And judging by the nods of approval and the thoughtful expressions around the room, he had succeeded. As the trial resumed, the focus returned to the case at hand. Yet the image of the man in the bearskin hat lingered in the minds of everyone present. Through his eloquence and conviction, Captain Whitaker had turned what could have been a trivial disagreement into a profound lesson, a testament to the enduring power of symbols and the values they represent. The courtroom, once a place of rigid formality and detached proceedings, had transformed into something almost magical. The exchange between Judge Eleanor Hartley and Captain Thomas Whitaker had shifted the energy entirely, turning what might have been a mundane legal hearing into a moment of collective reflection. As the judge resumed her seat and the murmurs in the gallery quieted, it became clear that the conversation wasn't over. Not emotionally, not intellectually. Something profound had unfolded, and neither the audience nor the participants were ready to let it go just yet. Judge Hartley leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression thoughtful as she studied Captain Whitaker. For someone known for her sharp wit and unyielding adherence to rules, she seemed unusually contemplative. "Captain," she said, breaking the silence with a tone softer than before, "you've made some compelling points, but allow me to ask you this. Do you think there's ever a risk in placing too much importance on symbols, that they might overshadow the substance they're meant to represent?" It was a fair question, one that could easily have derailed the momentum Captain Whitaker had built. Yet instead of hesitating, he nodded slowly, acknowledging the validity of her concern. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady but tinged with humility, "that's a very real risk, and one we in the Royal Guard take seriously. Symbols are powerful, yes, but only if they point to something meaningful. If we lose sight of the values behind them, then they become empty gestures." He paused, letting his words resonate. The room remained utterly silent, every ear tuned to his next sentence. "Take this bearskin hat, for example," he continued, gesturing subtly toward the towering accessory atop his head. "If I wore it without understanding its significance, if I treated it as nothing more than a fashion statement or a relic of the past, it would lose all meaning. It's not the hat itself that matters. It's what it stands for. Discipline, sacrifice, loyalty. Those are the things that truly matter." His explanation struck a chord, not just with Judge Hartley but with everyone in the room. Even the court stenographer paused mid-typing, her hands hovering above the keyboard as she absorbed his words. There was a universality to what he was saying, a truth that transcended the specific context of the courtroom. Symbols, whether they were uniforms, flags, or even rituals, derived their power from the ideals they represented. Without those ideals, they were little more than decoration. But Captain Whitaker wasn't content to leave it at that. He pressed further, weaving his argument into a broader discussion about shared values. Your Honor, he said, leaning forward slightly as though drawing the judge and the entire room into a private conversation. I believe the same principle applies to justice. The gavel you hold, the robes you wear, the procedures we follow, they're all symbols. They remind us of fairness, accountability, and the rule of law. But if we ever forgot why those symbols exist, if we allowed them to become mere formalities, we'd be failing in our duty. There was a murmur of agreement from the gallery, though it quickly faded when Judge Hartley raised an eyebrow, signaling for quiet. Her gaze lingered on Captain Whitaker, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. She hadn't expected this. A soldier using his defense of tradition to reinforce the very principles she held dear. It was as though he had turned the tables, aligning their seemingly disparate worlds under a single banner of purpose. You make an excellent point, Captain, she admitted, her voice carrying a note of respect. Perhaps it's easy to forget, in the day-to-day grind of our respective roles, that symbols are tools. They're meant to serve a higher purpose, not distract from it. She glanced down at her own attire, the black robe draped over her shoulders, and smiled faintly, as if seeing it in a new light. Tell me, though, how do you ensure that the symbolism doesn't overshadow the substance? In your line of work, I imagine it's a delicate balance. Captain Whitaker straightened slightly, clearly pleased by the opportunity to elaborate. It starts with education, Your Honor, he explained. Every recruit who joins the Royal Guard learns not just how to wear the uniform, but why we wear it. We study the history, the sacrifices, the stories of those who came before us. It's not enough to look the part, you have to live it. Every action, every decision, must reflect the values the uniform represents. He paused, his eyes scanning the room as if addressing each person individually. And it's not just about looking inward. It's also about engaging with the public. When people see us standing guard outside Buckingham Palace or marching in parades, we want them to feel pride, not just in us, but in the nation we represent. That connection is crucial. It reminds us that our role isn't just ceremonial, it's deeply practical. We're here to protect, to inspire, and to uphold the trust placed in us. By now, the atmosphere in the courtroom had reached a crescendo of engagement. Spectators exchanged glances, nodding in agreement or whispering quietly to one another. Even the bailiff, usually stoic and detached, appeared captivated by the unfolding dialogue. Judge Hartley, too, seemed thoroughly engrossed, her earlier irritation giving way to fascination. Captain Whitaker, she said after a moment, her tone warm and reflective, you've given us much to think about, not just today but moving forward. You've reminded me that while courts and guards may operate in different spheres, we share a common mission, to uphold the principles that bind us together as a society. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. In many ways, you've turned this courtroom into a classroom. Her comment drew soft laughter from the gallery, easing the intensity of the moment without diminishing its significance. Captain Whitaker smiled faintly, bowing his head in acknowledgement. Thank you, Your Honor. That's high praise indeed. But if there's one thing I hope everyone takes away from this, it's that symbols, whether they're hats, robes, or anything else, are only as strong as the values they represent. And those values are worth protecting. As he finished speaking, the room erupted into spontaneous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping not just for the man in the bearskin hat, but for the ideals he had articulated so eloquently. Even Judge Hartley joined in, offering a rare smile as she nodded approvingly. For a brief moment, the courtroom felt less like a venue for legal proceedings and more like a gathering of citizens united by a shared sense of purpose. When the applause finally subsided, Judge Hartley cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. Well, Captain Whitaker, she said, her tone lighter but still authoritative, you've certainly earned the right to keep your hat today, but don't think this means I'll be lenient next time. Her remark drew polite laughter, diffusing any lingering tension. I wouldn't expect anything less, Your Honor, Captain Whitaker replied with a respectful nod. His composure never wavered, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He had achieved what he set out to do, bridge the gap between two worlds, and remind everyone present of the enduring power of tradition and values. As the trial resumed, the focus returned to the case at hand. Yet the impact of Captain Whitaker's words lingered long after the session ended. Spectators filed out of the courtroom, many stopping to shake his hand or offer words of gratitude. Reporters waiting outside eagerly jotted down notes, eager to capture the story of the royal guard whose eloquence had won over an entire courtroom. Even Judge Hartley seemed affected. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she glanced once more at the towering bearskin hat, now framed against the fading sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. Perhaps she thought there was value in preserving symbols, not because they were perfect, but because they connected us to something greater than ourselves. For Captain Whitaker, the day had been a testament to the power of communication and understanding. Through patience, respect, and a deep appreciation for shared values, he had turned what could have been a trivial disagreement into a moment of unity. And as he stepped out into the crisp London air, the weight of the bearskin hat resting comfortably on his shoulders, he knew he had done his duty, not just as a soldier but as a guardian of tradition and a champion of the principles that bound them all together. As the trial concluded and the courtroom began to empty, the atmosphere remained charged with a sense of shared understanding. Captain Thomas Whitaker stood quietly at the witness stand, his towering bearskin hat still casting its familiar shadow over him. The room, once filled with whispers of amusement and curiosity, now buzzed with admiration. Spectators lingered in their seats, reluctant to leave as if they feared breaking the spell that had been cast over the proceedings. Even Judge Eleanor Hartley seemed hesitant to bring the day's events to an official close. "Captain Whitaker," she said finally, her voice softer than it had been throughout the entire session. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to thank you, not just for your testimony today, but for reminding us all of something important." She paused, adjusting her glasses as though searching for the right words. "In our line of work, yours and mine, we often focus so intently on the details, on the rules and procedures, that we forget the bigger picture. Today you've given us a glimpse of that picture." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply, not only with Captain Whitaker but with everyone present. For those who had come expecting nothing more than a routine legal proceeding, this unexpected moment of connection between tradition and modernity felt almost revolutionary. People exchanged glances, nodding silently in agreement. Some scribbled notes furiously, while others simply sat back, absorbing the significance of what had transpired. Captain Whitaker bowed his head slightly, maintaining his composure despite the warmth of gratitude radiating from the judge's tone. "Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady yet tinged with humility, "the credit belongs to the values we've discussed, the principles of duty, integrity, and unity. If my presence here today has helped reinforce those ideals, then I consider it time well spent." His response drew another round of applause, quieter this time but no less heartfelt. As the clapping subsided, Judge Hartley rose from her bench, signaling the formal end of the session. But before dismissing the court, she added one final remark. "Let this be a reminder to all of us that justice isn't confined to these walls, or to any single profession. It's a shared responsibility, upheld by people like you who dedicate themselves to serving others. Thank you, Captain." With that, she rapped her gavel gently against the wooden block, officially concluding the hearing. The sound echoed through the room, marking the end of the trial, but not the conversation. As spectators filed out into the hallway, many stopped to congratulate Captain Whitaker, shaking his hand or offering words of praise. Reporters stationed outside the courthouse snapped photos and jotted down quotes, eager to capture the story of the man whose eloquence had transformed a simple courtroom exchange into a moment of national pride. For Captain Whitaker, however, the attention wasn't about personal glory. He moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, accepting compliments graciously but deflecting any suggestion that he was the sole hero of the day. "It's not about me," he told a reporter who asked how he managed to win over such a stern judge. "It's about the values we all share. If anything, I hope today inspires people to think about the traditions and symbols that shape our lives, and to remember why they matter." His modesty only added to the admiration surrounding him. By refusing to take full credit for the impact of his words, he embodied the very principles he had spoken about: humility, service, and respect for something greater than oneself. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Judge Hartley packed up her belongings, her movements slower and more deliberate than usual. She glanced around the now empty courtroom, her gaze lingering on the spot where Captain Whitaker had stood moments earlier. There was a thoughtful expression on her face, as though she were replaying the exchange in her mind. Her initial irritation at the sight of the bearskin hat seemed worlds away now, replaced by a newfound appreciation for the weight of history and symbolism. As she tucked her notes into her briefcase, her eyes fell upon the framed British flag hanging in the corner of the room. It occurred to her that perhaps she had underestimated the power of symbols herself. While she prided herself on upholding the law with precision and fairness, she realized that the rituals and emblems of the judiciary served a similar purpose. To the Royal Guard's uniform, they reminded people of the ideals worth striving for. Justice wasn't just about verdicts and sentences. It was about trust, accountability, and the enduring belief in a better future. That evening, as London settled into its usual rhythm of bustling streets and glowing lamplights, news of the courtroom exchange spread quickly. Social media lit up with posts praising Captain Whitaker's poise and wisdom. Memes featuring the towering bearskin hat appeared alongside captions like, "When tradition meets justice" and "Respect the hat." Journalists penned articles exploring the deeper themes of the encounter, highlighting the importance of preserving cultural heritage while adapting to modern contexts. Some commentators even suggested that the incident might inspire renewed discussions about the role of tradition in contemporary society. Back at Buckingham Palace, where Captain Whitaker resumed his duties later that day, his fellow guards greeted him with knowing smiles. Word of his courtroom performance had already reached them, thanks to the speed of modern communication. One colleague playfully saluted him, saying, "Looks like you turned the judge into a fan, sir." Another chimed in, "Maybe next time, they'll let us wear the hats in Parliament, too." Despite the light-hearted teasing, there was genuine pride among his peers. They recognized that Captain Whitaker hadn't just defended the honor of the Royal Guard, he had elevated it. His ability to articulate the meaning behind their uniform reminded them of why they chose this path in the first place. It was a rare opportunity to step outside the confines of their daily routines and see their role through fresh eyes. As for Judge Hartley, the experience stayed with her long after the courtroom doors closed. That night, sitting at her desk in her study, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. She pulled out a photograph of her own, a black-and-white image of her father, a retired barrister, standing proudly in his judicial robes. Looking at it now, she understood what Captain Whitaker meant when he spoke about the stories behind symbols. Her father's robes weren't just fabric. They represented decades of hard work, dedication, and a commitment to justice. Just like the bearskin hat, they carried meaning far beyond their physical form. Inspired by the memory, Judge Hartley decided to do something unusual. The following morning, she arrived at the courthouse carrying a small framed photo of the bearskin hat. Placing it discreetly on the corner of her desk, she smiled to herself. It wasn't meant to be displayed prominently. It was a private reminder, a token of the lesson she had learned. Symbols mattered, yes, but only because they pointed to something greater, the shared values that united people across professions, generations, and experiences. Days turned into weeks, and life returned to normal for both Captain Whitaker and Judge Hartley. Yet the ripple effects of that extraordinary courtroom exchange continued to unfold. School teachers used the story to spark discussions about tradition and progress in classrooms. Community leaders referenced it during speeches, urging citizens to find common ground despite differences. And somewhere in the heart of London, a young child visiting Buckingham Palace stared up at the towering figure of a guard in a bearskin hat, feeling a newfound sense of awe and pride. For Captain Whitaker, the day served as a testament to the power of communication and empathy. Through patience, respect, and a deep appreciation for shared values, he had bridged the gap between two seemingly disparate worlds. In doing so, he reminded everyone involved, including himself, that the strongest connections are forged not through rigid adherence to rules, but through a willingness to listen, learn, and grow. And so, the story of the judge, the royal guard, and the bearskin hat became more than just a curious anecdote. It became a symbol in its own right, a reminder that even in a world often divided by opinion and perspective, there is always room for understanding, respect, and unity. Whether under the shadow of a towering hat or within the solemn walls of a courtroom, the pursuit of justice and the preservation of tradition go hand in hand, bound together by the timeless values that define humanity itself.